Hey guys, it's Tim Windsor again, just out having my morning coffee. I just got a call from one of my clients early this morning who was wrestling a problem, and it just brought up an interesting point in conversation to me, and I just want to share it with you today. Maybe there's some help for you depending on where you're at. And he called me because he's got a customer of his who's in a period of transition or succession for their business, where the business is being transition to the sun. But we don't tend to use that word transition, we use succession. And we talk about succession planning, and that's a great term and obviously well used and well accepted in our understanding regarding what happens in businesses when people retire and things change, whether it's a family business being turned over to another family member, or maybe it's succession planning that we talk about within organizations. The one thing I've come to realize over the years is words matter. What you call things matter, because the immediate emotional impact of a word has a lot of impact on how people feel about a process and how they enter into it. So what I've noticed over the years, because I've worked with many companies and organizations and individuals through these seasons in their business and in their life, what I've come to realize is that I prefer the term transition plan, not succession plan. Succession has this sense in which somebody's taking over. It's almost a word that feels for me that it comes, sort of like from the times of the kings. And when somebody succeeds someone else, there's almost a sense of over dominance for me in that word, if we're not careful. So I prefer the word transition and transition planning. And what I found over the years is that when I've made that subtle nuance change with my customers and talked about transition planning, it actually changes the emotional impact as we talk about that. Because what I've recognized as I've worked with senior leaders and business owners through these times is that when they start looking at succession, or they look at what I would call transition, is what they fail to understand is the emotional impact of that identity change. This season of change isn't just about functionality and process and titles and org charts and shareholder agreements. It's not about that. It's actually about the emotional impact of changing what one does, because so much of people's identity is locked up into what they do. And so when we move into times of transition, when someone is transitioning out of something and someone else is transitioning into it, or someone's selling a business and transitioning out and someone else is taking over, or a family transition, the emotional and psychological impact of the changing of identity is one of the critical factors that sets this thing in motion for success. A person needs to receive a new identity through transition, but another person gives up an identity. And particularly when they're giving up an identity that's going to take them outside the organization, the emotional impact of that is critical. And so I often start working a number of years ahead with senior leaders as we talk about these things, about the emotional impact of changing identity. The transition isn't just a functional or transactional transition. It is an identity transition. It is an emotional transition. It is a psychological transition. And so I just want to remind you of that today. If you're in a season of transition, if you're creating succession plans or transition plans, don't just think about the practical, structural process of succession or transition, as I'd like to call it. Think of the emotional impact on transitioning our identities. That is the critical place that often makes these things more difficult. It causes people to clutch on to certain things organizationally or operationally, not because they think they can do them better, but because they're intrinsically tied up into their identity. So if you're in a season of transition, please be mindful that it isn't just a structural thing, it's an emotional thing, it's a psychological thing, and find somebody who can help you process that. And if you're planning for transition in your business, if you're looking at long-term strategy for a transition, don't just create a structural plan around process. Consider the emotional and psychological impact of transition, both for the organization, for people within it, employees, as things transition, as identities change, and for the players that are intrinsic within that transitionary plan. If you really change this language around this, very simply, this little nuance will change the dynamic of the conversation that you'll have. Have an excellent day. Go out and uncommodify and set your world ablaze as you break the evil spell of sameness.